It's my great pleasure to bring up the geniuses behind Spookyworld, Spooktacular. Producers Anthony Landry and Danny Wolf. Come on up, Anthony and Danny. Hey. And let's give it up for the director of Spooktacular, Quinn Monahan. Come on down. And he's a haunted house expert. He's traveled the country visiting haunted attractions. He's also an actor who we've seen in The Devil's Rejects on TV shows like Lost. He's the new grandpa in The Munsters. Let's give it up for Daniel Roebuck. And he was the first VIP horror guest at Spookyworld, the one and only Kane Hodder. He'll be here soon. He's on the way. Kane Hodder, he's in the dealer's room. And of course, the man who started it all. Let's give it up for Spookyworld founder David Bertolino.
It's us against them. Yeah, trivia. You're trying to watch an actor.
Hello. Hello. Good evening, folks.
Hello.
So you know, we cannot see a freaking thing up here. Maybe it's best not to.
One, two,
with
three.
people way in the back.
Well, I'll start with David. David, give us this inside scoop on what led a former costume salesman to create the one and only Spookyworld back in 1990, 1991. What was the genesis of the hayride that led to Spookyworld?
If I can go back further, when I was about 14 years old, my dad made a career move and bought a joke shop in downtown Boston. And so I was the official demonstrator of whoopee cushions and hand buzzers. And I moved on to Halloween. And then pretty much we started wholesaling Halloween supplies on the East Coast. And then just to move up the clock real quick, I became a sales manager for Ruby's Costume Company. And from that point, I was out of work late in the season because it was an early season of wholesaling. And we started selling supplies to haunted houses with little independent folks throughout the country. But at some point, I got interested in a hayride that was operating in New Jersey called Haunted Hayrides. And I flew out there one night and witnessed what I couldn't believe. There was hundreds of people paying $10 a ticket to go on a hayride. So I brought back the idea to family and friends. And I went out and foolishly bought a dairy farm that was being repossessed by the FDIC, and I created this hayride trail. And while I was developing it, I called this fellow who I'd never met before by the name of Tom Savini, and I said, Tom, I'm an idiot. I sell hand buzzers and whoopee cushions. That's my experience, but if you can help me with creating little skits, vignettes along this hayride trail, I'd love to take you and have you on board for it. And so Tom came out and worked the summer developing his ideas along this hayride trail. And my partner and I figured if we could sell 200 tickets a night, we would break even. And on October 1st, we opened outside of Boston.
Of 1991.
And sold 2,000 tickets on opening night. Wow. And the end of the month, it was 60,000 paid admissions. So my 15-year loan, we paid off in 3 weeks. And we bought out some financial partners who were only there to provide money. And they reluctantly said goodbye to us because they thought they were going to be attached to us for 15 years, but we were able to just have them exit because they got paid in full. And Tom stayed on. And make no mistake about it, I don't have a creative bone in my body when it comes to stage design. Tom did it all, literally, and I thank him. It was, his genius that created Spooky World. So I want to give
David
credit.
Bertolino and Tom Savini created the modern haunting industry. There was nothing before the two of them. And by the time it was all over in 2003, there was a thriving multi-billion-dollar haunting industry around the world. And as you all know, it just gets bigger every year.
Can I just, I want to just say, do you remember before Spooky World, it was you guys, remember you go to the JC's Haunted House in your neighborhood, in Des Moines, Iowa,
Sure.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the JC's and the Rotary Club, they got the Don Post masks,
Sure.
they'd be like, ah! And they would just do it as a charity thing, but you had the vision to turn it into this business. And I mean, we'll talk more about, it's your show, but there was no place on earth like Spooky
Thank
World.
you. Is there anyone out there that ever visited Spooky World out there in the audience? Oh.
Who knows?
gotta hear you, we can't see
who
it.
in the audience clapping
It's my mother.
knows about Spooky World? Who knows anything about Spooky World? Little smattering. You're gonna learn a lot when you see our film.
Yeah, when you watch this movie.
Yeah, so, to move up the clock, Tom came back each year. We actually changed the name of the business from Spooky Hayrides to Spooky World. Tom said, listen, it's not just a hayride. It's like, Disneyland, Disney World, Spooky World. Within days, we officially, legally changed the name, and each year we added a haunted house attraction that was highly themed, and we gave, this is the most important thing, is we gave people a reason to come back year after year, and that's including the celebrities that we brought in. Every year we would add several new celebrities, and the level of celebrityhood was going up and up and up. And all of a sudden, we're in the Wall Street Journal. Willard Scott is broadcasting the weather live from Spooky World. The WWF has their superstars every Friday night signing autographs. But the signature thing was the hayride. That was why people travel the distance to come. And on the panel here, we have Anthony Landry. And Anthony, I'd like you to tell the audience what your experience was. This man is a super fan of Spooky World and now one of the producers on this film.
Wow.
Thank you again for everybody that gave me this opportunity. So, in the 90s, way before cell phones, way before the internet, you had to rely on magazines like the ones that Tony put out, Fangoria. So Fangoria would have conventions that would come around, but they were never a real guarantee every year. Then all of a sudden, I was in high school taking the school bus in, had a Walkman with a cassette player. And I actually turned on the radio and I heard this jingle. And when you see this film, you'll understand what I'm saying. And at the end of it, it said, come to Spooky World in Berlin, Mass. And the first thing that got me was, you have a Berlin in Massachusetts? I thought that's in Germany. But I found out we had a Berlin, and at the end of it, they said, come meet Kane Hodder and Elvira. And I said, you can do that? Long before Monsterpalooza, long before most of the conventions, David brought in the idea of having a haunted house attraction, and at the very end as a reward, you get to meet your favorite celebrity horror icon. So there I was. I had to beg and plead my uncle to give me a ride out there because it was about 45 minutes outside of Boston where I grew up. And I got to meet Kane Hodder. And I still have that photo to this day. And thanks to David and thanks to this crew. The interviews for this started just before the pandemic. So we had a convention out in Boston called Rock and Shock. It was in Worcester. It was amazing. So Kane was there, Adam Green was there, and we had just started the production. And I got to interview Kane and bring that photo that he signed for me when I was 14 to him. And the great thing about Kane is hopefully he does get here, but at the same time, when he starts talking about Spooky World, you're going to see a side of Kane Hodder that you haven't seen before. And I really can't wait for you to see that. He's a wonderful guy.
But yeah, and now I'm producing this film during a pandemic, the bi-coastal production. That is a life in and of itself, and what Quinn has been able to put together, David's been able to put together, Danny's been able to put together is just mind-blowing. And it proves that no matter what's thrown David's way, and Quinn's way, and Danny's way, something great's gonna come out of it. So I really can't wait for you to see this tomorrow night.
Question for Quinn and Danny and David. How did the documentary Spooktacular come about? What was the genesis?
I could take this one. I've known David for just about 10 years now, but when we first met, he was in town doing a play because he was a theater producer as well. And one night he told me all about Spookyworld, and the more he told me, I was like, what, you actually started this industry then? And he's like, yeah, we did. We were the first to have a haunted theme park, but also a whole group of celebrities, horror celebrities like Kane Hodder and Linda Blair, who would just, people could just come up and, that didn't exist, really. There was like one show, I think, right, Tony, that did it. The Fangoria show was one of the very first. In fact,
the only convention at the time.
Yeah, Fangoria started it. David said, I'm going to take the best of Fangoria and the best of my haunted hayride, put them together, and it just took off like crazy. You know, thousands.
I remember you always raiding the Fangoria conventions in New York, rounding up the talent for your Halloween.
Stealing your people away.
You know, this reminds. Do you remember? I wrote about Spooky World.
That's
for
right, a
Fangoria.
sidebar. Yes.
That's
yes.
right. I wrote a thing about the great haunts in America for Fangoria. Gosh, I'm just remembering that now, how everything comes together. And I found Spooky World when I was doing Matlock, and Entertainment Tonight said, hey, do you want to go around the country and find all the haunted houses? So we did that. Me and my great friend Chucky Williams, we drove around and shot at Spooky World. And
Robert England?
He was there that first time.
We had that weekend that you were there, we called Heavyweights of Horror. We had Doug Bradley, who's Pinhead. We had George Wilbur. We had R.A. Mahalha. And
Robert England.
And Robert England, of course, yeah. So, and
All
Kane,
four
Kane Hodder.
in the haunted barn,
All
out
at
in
once,
the middle
all
of
at the same.
nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
And kids like this guy here could go and see all their favorite horror stars, which was not being done anywhere else in the country.
And you didn't have to buy anything, you could just meet them.
Right.
You could just meet them. They all said hello to everybody. Like, I remember that there was no, it didn't matter if you bought something, didn't buy something. If you wanted to meet Butch Patrick, you met Butch Patrick. Right?
Very relaxed atmosphere, very laid back. And we later moved on to a different location. We made an arrangement with the New England Patriots football team. And they gave us some great space. And, honestly, the numbers went through the roof. Some of the purists of horror got mad at me because I was bringing in mainstream celebrities. I had a MASH reunion, I had a Dawson's Creek reunion. And so, we were getting general audiences. But our numbers spiked to about 10 to 12,000 people a night in October. So that was, at one point, I think it was maybe the 8th year, we got an award from Ticketmaster as a million ticket seller, which is like less than 1% of all of their ticketing events.
Danny, you've done some great documentaries about cult movies and midnight movies. How did you get involved with Spooktacular?
Well, I met David actually a few years ago. I went to his play that was at Hollywood, and it was amazing. And he told me I'm starting to make this documentary about Spooky World. It was my old theme park, and we're doing a documentary. And I told David, I go, well, you got the two best things you can have going for you: horror and theme parks. Well, the horror genre is so massive, especially in the documentary market. And theme parks and documentaries like Class Action Park on HBO Max have done so phenomenally well. I said, David, you got the best of two worlds here. You got the horror fans and the theme park worlds. You can't lose making a documentary. But I remember telling David, you're gonna do a doc. It can't just be all great footage, highlights, interviews. I go, was there conflict? Was there drama? What happened? Well, it couldn't all been good. And David said, oh boy, I've got hours of stories about the crap I had to deal with between PETA showing up, city council showing up, local officials trying to close me down at every end. And I said, really? And he would tell me story after story about all that he had to endure.
And a few irate husbands and wives.
It was like how you kept this open as long. I said, you've got so many amazing stories, and what really helps the documentary is all the conflict, the drama, everything you had to endure to keep this thing going. And those lucky enough to see the screenings tomorrow night in Pasadena, and we'll get to see the documentary in due time.
Well, you know, the nice thing, Danny, is we have this original footage because some of our staff was in broadcast media. So they were carrying around cameras, and there's a lot of, really great, rich footage that we have. And you talk about conflict, just simple things like we get to work one day and there's a PETA picket line out in front of our box office. There's like 20 protesters with picket signs. And they're saying that we're cruel to our mice and to our rats. Now,
Live mice and rats in a few of the attractions.
Were in a crystal casket, and there were about 40 or 50 of them licking peanut butter on from one of the actresses in a crystal coffin. And she loved the job. My associate said,
Mouse girl.
Nobody will ever want to be cast in that. These people never wanted to have understudies. They stayed forever. It was the most photographed thing at Spookyworld. Then we had rats in the floor system under a 1-inch plexiglass. And so the protesters made signs that the rats are stressed out, they're mistreated, they're unhappy. So I immediately addressed this stuff in a nice way, I'm sure you'll agree. I hired a pet psychic, I hired a veterinarian, and I had some mystic that would communicate with them. And every Monday on all of the talk shows, they would call in and say how happy the rats and mice were. And so we made levity of it, but it made national press attention, and we addressed the issue. But there was constant conflict, little conflict.
And it's all in the movie.
That's what's amazing is all the footage that was kept. Most of the time you want to do a documentary like this, it's hard to find there's nothing.
Dude, it was hard to find. Let's not kid ourselves. It was very hard to take this. We finally got a lot of footage, but it wasn't handed to us. We spent 2.5 years finding footage, but we did. We got some amazing footage, and it's all in there. If you're a fan of the 90s, if you're a fan of theme parks, if you're a fan of horror, this movie's for you.
We're very grateful, Tony, for this panel here. These folks are obviously interested in what we did at Spookyworld, and so as kind of a give back, I'd like to invite them to one of the screenings tomorrow night.
Who would like to see the film free tomorrow evening?
Tomorrow night?
Raise your hand.
Walking distance from here, just a few blocks away.
We rented a theater a couple of blocks away, and would love to. We'll pass out tickets. And
if you take a ticket, though, come. If you take a ticket, come. Like if you don't think you're really going to go, don't take a ticket.
We also have T-shirts tomorrow
Then someone
night
else
if you
can-
show up.
What's that?
That was that thing you said.
We also have T-shirts if you show up tomorrow night. So this little
They
ditty.
have T-shirts.
This thing?
Yes, this is the best male model we could find. I know that wasn't an insult. Yeah, there you go. We're doing the hefty man model calendar later tonight.
The regular guy look.
We have the Spookyworld Speedo,
Oh no! Well, the thing about David, like Bruce Valanche says that. What does he say? Call you a media work.
Yeah, Bruce Valanche and Sally Kirkland both say David Bertolino's a media whore.
Right, spoken well.
Well, I ran a play a few years in West Hollywood just because I wanted to lose a little money, and every night to draw attention, which this really did help. It actually sold out our box office. I would get my picketers. I would advertise them on Craigslist. And they would picket in front of my theater saying, "Close this show, God hates this show, shame on you." And the picketers would be going, so when my celebrities came for, before curtain call, I'd give them a sign. So, Peter Brady, I can't think of his name, Christopher Knight, Sally Kirkland, and Bruce Valanche, of course, was one of the judges. they'd be protesting the show every night out in front. And all the tour buses would say, oh my God, the show is filled with nudity and it's getting incredible press. And then all of a sudden the tour bus empties out and they're out buying tickets at the box office. But the celebrities help drive the business to our box
Well,
office.
speaking of big box office, at the 2 times I went to Spooky World, the crowds were so large that the fire marshals shut you down. That was an ongoing struggle. Could you talk about those experiences
Well,
and those conflicts?
In a small town, you've got small town politics. And back then, this wouldn't happen today, but the chief of police was the head of my security force. And the fire marshal was the head of my paid duty force for fire marshal. And so there was an immediate conflict. The 2 of the 3 selectmen were working as ticket takers. And they had a vote every night to allow me to go beyond curfew. So there was one politician in the town, I will not, mention his name, David Miller. And he signed a bill to close us down, and he went to the state fire marshal's office and under an emergency move shut us down. And so that was kind of small town politics. But luckily, Robert Kraft was reading the paper that day, and he said, move to Gillette Stadium. I have, a wooded area, and we've got plenty of parking, plenty of concessions. And next year I cut a deal, and we moved to Gillette Stadium, and we were under the Patriots umbrella, and nobody was going to fuck with us then.
Hey now, hey. So meanwhile, back to Berlin for a minute, because that's where a lot of the drama happened. There wasn't a lot, I don't think there was a lot of drama at Gillette Stadium,
No,
other
never.
than sort of some tragedy, which we'll learn about at the end of our film. But in Berlin, tell us the Tiny Tim story. Who knows Tiny Tim? Tiny Tim fans out there? Raise your hand, clap. Tiny Tim figures big in our movie. Tiny Tim, look him up, Google him.
I don't know why, Quinn, but I get compared to P.T. Barnum. And,
Because that's who you are.
You don't know why?
And, and
I
so,
learned
Tiny, I like to have a Fellini circus going on in my head all the time. And I would project that on the, Hayride Trail into the crowd mixes of all the queue lines. We would build mini stages. So I had a home for Tiny Tim. Every night he would come out and sing Tiptoe Through the Tulips and various other medleys of one hit. And Bobby Boris Pickett would sing the Halloween national anthem, the Monster Mash. And so Tiny was talking about getting married. And I said, you got married on the Tonight Show with Miss Vicky. Would you consider marrying Miss Jan here at Spooky World, live here in Berlin?
Okay, but let me interject something here. At that time, Tiny Tim getting married on the Johnny Carson show, if any of you remember that, was the highest rated program in the United States, second only to the moon landing. Now he's at David's park and he's talking about getting married again. So David goes, and then finish the story, David.
Well, we basically convinced Tiny to get married on Halloween night. I called Jay Leno's show, spoke to the producer, Patty, and sparked her interest. Didn't hear back, and then all of a sudden Jay calls us interested in doing it. He assigns his roving reporter,
Bill Maher,
and Bill comes out. We're setting up equipment, sound equipment, lots and lots of cameras. We're pre-selling tickets. We have limited edition t-shirts made. I witnessed the wedding of Tiny Tim, October 31st. And the night before Tiny sees me on the Midway and said, Mr. David, I've given it some thought and I think I'm infringing on the memory of Mr. Carson's show. I just can't get married tomorrow. And I've got all this equipment. I got NBC out there. I got, staff ready to go. He wouldn't do it. So we called the Tonight Show folks, explained to them, well, somebody who still got along with Johnny at that point called the house in Malibu, told Johnny what was happening, and Carson called the Radisson Inn in Marlboro and spoke to Tiny and said, Tiny, you have my blessing. It's a career move. Go for it. Do it. Tiny shows up. I'm going to get married tonight. It's like, okay, we're ready. Oh, it was a close, very close call.
This is why you have to go to this documentary.
We have actually the original footage of him saying, actually breaking off his relationship with his girlfriend the morning before he got married, breaking it off, and she's leaving the area hysterically crying, and all on footage. And then
the girlfriend was not the girl he was marrying?
No, he
Oh, show
the
business.
girlfriend was one of my witches.
Oh, no. Oh.
It's an up and down situation there. But anyway, it's what they say is highly entertaining. And,
Yeah, it sounds like a great day for that girl.
It's pretty scandalous, actually.
And David, you've had some non-horror celebrities who've come to Spooky World as paying customers during your heyday. Talk about some of the people that just dropped by unannounced.
Oh, yeah, there was a ton of local Boston celebrities that were in sports, Celtics, the Red Sox, the Bruins, of course. And then, whoever was shooting in town, like I remember Mystic River was shooting down the street from us. So Sean Penn and Kevin Bacon came a couple of times with their families, Robin Wright and Kara Sedgwick, and they loved Spooky World. And one of the catalysts, if you remember Quinn, 2 years ago, Quinn's telling me, we got to do this movie, we got to follow you around. I said, who's interested? And it was October, and I'm watching Seth Meyers, and my wife and Cindy and I are, it's like the Halloween week, and Seth Meyers is interviewing John Krasinski. I guess you guys know who John Krasinski is, right?
Quiet Place.
Quiet Place. And Seth says, fellow New Englander, do you have any fond memories of Halloween back in Newton, Massachusetts? And Krasinski says, yeah, my best moments as a kid were spent visiting Spooky World theme park in Berlin, Massachusetts. They go on to a second segment and they talk about incidents that happened at Spooky World. And it was like a commercial. So the next day I called Quinn and I said, I think I'm in on this. I think I'll help you with the documentary. You can start interviewing me. And he followed me around for 2 years since.
And the rest is cinematic history.
Krasinski said, my mom was a witch. She used to date Tiny Tim. And he ruined it. That didn't happen.
Walk us through some of the various haunted houses that you had at Spooky World. It eventually grew to 7, right?
Yeah, the signature first haunted house was the Tom Savini haunted house, affectionately named after Tom. And Tom, Tom's very clever. I mean, in the beginning, you've got a big budget, you spend the budget, and then you're scratching for pennies under the seat cushions. And so I said, Tom, this is it, we got to wrap this up. He said, give me a couple of $1,000s more, it's like, we're out of money, no more. And he goes to a sporting goods store and comes back with a reel of fishing line. And this is pure Tom. I mean, he's a total genius. Brings the house lights up, takes an industrial staple gun, and staples various strands of hanging fish line. So when you're walking through this dark haunted house and you feel like a little scratch against your ear or on your top of your head, it just creeps you out. And he came up with these great haunts, always at the end of the season when we were out of money. There was very little budget left, but at one point we had 6 haunted houses. We had the American Horror Museum, which was populated with all of this original props and displays from first-run horror movies. Freddy's glove, Jason's mask, and so forth.
I remember you used to come to the Fangoria conventions and stick around for the auction, and you were always the highest bidder on some of the prize
I
props.
gotta tell you, it was a tough time, Tony. You made it tough for me, and I'll tell you why. Planet Hollywood was getting into these collectibles, and they were buying up, as soon as they finished shooting something, it goes right to Planet Hollywood. I couldn't even bid on it. So finally, one lucky winter, for Weekend of Horrors Fangoria, It was a severe snowstorm. We're at the Roosevelt, I think it was the Roosevelt Hotel.
I was Pennsylvania, Hotel Pennsylvania.
And, you know, it's like a foot of snow within a couple of hours. And all of a sudden, it's probably a room this size, clears out. There's hardly anyone left. So Planet Hollywood went back to their planet. I was one of the few people left seated, and I was winning every bid at the auction. It was great. I had on the roof of my Jeep was the creature from FX, Rosebud, on the top of my roof, and then the cap was filled with other props and displays. But we scored that one year finally.
And what's this about a spooky world curse that I've heard about?
I'll talk about that.
Quinn's documented this stuff.
We also have a curse involved. You guys are local, and some of you may remember on Hollywood Boulevard in the 90s, there was a museum and a little kind of a weird satanic boutique called Hell House of Hollywood. Anybody remember that?
Yeah, it was right off Hollywood Boulevard, yeah. On like Ivar or, yeah, I remember that. Creepy.
Across from Musso and Frank.
So David walks in there one day, right after making a deal to have Robert Englund come to the park, and he sees all these creepy wax figures based on real crimes. You know, the Hillside Strangler, and going all the way back to the Fatty Arbuckle killings, and everything in between, Charles Manson. But he also sees Bela Lugosi, and beautiful Bela Lugosi wax figure as Dracula, and he wants that one, but they won't sell it to him. Anyway, long story short, they got booted out of Hollywood, and the guy, the two satanic Church of Satan, who owned the place, called him and said, "You can have Bela Lugosi, but you got to come and get all of them." And they're all really creepy wax figures based on crimes, rapes, killings. And David said, "Well, okay." He brings them all back, he builds a place for them, charges a separate fee and a separate entrance, and says, "This isn't really part of Spooky World, but if you're really sick enough and you want to see that shit, it's over there." And he charges an extra $5, of course, because it's David Bertolino. The very next year, Spooky World is forced to shut down. And I'm not going to tell you much more than that. But, you know, there's a big coincidence about those things, and you're going to learn more about that if you come and see it. So, I would like to just acknowledge a couple of people who aren't on the stage with us this evening, and that is our writer, Gail Jordan, who's out there in the audience. She spent 3 years researching and writing this incredible story. And we have one of our East Coast producers, Mr. Bill Tartaglia, who shot, I don't know, 100 interviews or something in the studio, Bill. And Aaron, are you out there? Aaron, I forgot your last name, Aaron, I'm so sorry. Aaron Meadows. One more hand for Mr. Aaron Meadows. I hope I didn't forget, but did I forget anybody else?
And every one of them is saying, "Why is Roebuck up there and not me?"
Well, you guys saw Danny a little bit in the opening there, but Mr. Daniel Roebuck is quite the film and horror historian himself. He's got a really fascinating background. And we were talking about Jay Leno earlier. Some of you may remember that Mr. Roebuck depicted Jay Leno in the movie Night Shift.
The Late Shift.
The Late Shift.
Brilliant movie.
You know, about Letterman.
I like to think of it was about Leno and Letterman, not about Letterman and Leno. You know what's funny? You live in Burbank. Some friends came in to visit the other day, and we're just going up to Halloween Town, and there's Jay Leno. Like, you know, I said, "Hey, you want to meet Jay Leno?" So we went over it. Like, you know, it's not often you just bump into people you play in the movies. But that happens to me more than it happens to most.
He hangs out at a pizza restaurant across from the CBS on Hollywood Boulevard, the old Taste of Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Montana's old place. That's where he is Sunday afternoon. Sunday night he's at Comedy and Magic Store.
Yeah,
If you want to stalk him, that's where you'll find
Yeah.
him.
No, he also is he's at Flappers.
Oh, yeah,
he's
Flappers,
great.
yeah.
You can go to Flappers, $20, you see Jay Leno, and he does an hour. It's amazing. He's the nicest person. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Jay Leno. We're here to talk about David Bertolino, but he knew Jay Leno.
Talk about condensing all this great footage you have, all the hundreds of interviews you did, or close to 100.
We did about 100 interviews of Spooky World employees, Spooky World fans,
Lots of
locals in
celebrities.
the town, several celebrities who were visited Spooky World. Mr. Daniel Roebuck, who I don't mention that you were there as a young roving reporter. I think you did touch on that.
I did. I was there twice. We did it once for Entertainment Tonight, and then we went back and we shot Halloween: The Happy Haunting of America.
Right.
Some of the footage is in the documentary. If you guys love haunts, this isn't an upsell or a pitch, but I do have copies of the documentary. We remastered it, and we have those at my table. I'm at the Trick or Treat table. But it's a great documentary about Halloween, and I loved going there and really giving Spooky World its due, because we have like a 10-minute segment about it. It's great.
Sweet. And Dan Roebuck, if you can just mention your project as Grandpa Munster.
Yeah, who's excited about Rob Zombie's The Monster? It's gonna be a lot of fun, so go see it. Did you ever have Al there at the park?
You know, I pitched him. He was very involved with Grandpa's restaurant at the time.
yeah,
and,
yeah. He didn't come up.
Didn't
well,
come up.
that was his loss, because it was such a great, loving crowd.
Well, Spooky World provided a lifeline to some of these celebrities who kind of on a low ebb of their careers.
Well, Butch Patrick,
Talk
for
about-
example, because we were talking about the Munsters. Butch Patrick was one of the very first, along with Tom Savini and Kane Hodder.
And
We
Gunnar
must have gotten
Hansen. Gunnar
bugged
Hansen
out there
was
somewhere.
one.
But he's in our film, so some of you probably remember him.
But Butch wasn't on the low. I mean, I think you revitalized Tiny Tim. I don't think that would, you know what I mean? That wouldn't, because you don't, look, it's hard to be an actor. And the perception is that sometimes you're more famous or less famous. But like Butch, you know, he did great work forever. All these guys, but Tiny Tim had a moment of glory, and then nobody kind of heard from him, and you put it back on the map.
You know,
that was a real
he was a
blessing.
really nice guy to us. He would come out and do 3 shows a night. And if the crowds were heavy, which, you know, frankly, you know, like I said before, we geared up for, 200 people, and every night we were doing 2,000 in the first year. But by the second year, we're doing 3,000 people a night, 7 days a week, 31 nights in a row. And Tiny would just keep coming out and doing encores and doing another show. He was our, celebrity singer in-house.
Yeah.
At one point, we were buying skids of plastic tulips, and he would throw them to the audience while singing Tiptoe Through the Tulips. And, we loved him. And at the end of the night, he didn't want to charge for his 8x10s. We finally had to insist, look, charge $5 at least. So he would take all the money, and at the end of the night, or at the end of the weekend, he would ask me to change all of his large bills to 5s and 1s. And I found out after he passed on from Gil Morse, his agent, that when he would go home on Monday to the Bronx, he would get off at the subway and he would hand out to all of the people on the street that needed money all of the small bills all the way home. And then, he would spend all of the cash money that he got heading home to bring it to people on the street.
For you youngsters out there, Tiny Tim arrived on the scene out of nowhere in 1969 and blew up for about 6 months. He was on the lips of everyone. It was like, it's hard to imagine now with the internet and everything is so sort of spread out and everybody has their little niche thing, but at that time, everyone in America was focused on whatever was the hottest thing on TV. Everyone knew who Tiny Tim was, and he showed up everywhere. He was a huge hit, and then fell into obscurity. And David Bertolino sort of pulled him back up, and he had his shining little moment.
One of our sponsors was TJ Maxx, and they would have employee nights because I met Ben Camarada on the beach in Aruba, and I pitched him sitting on the beach when I found out he was president of TJ Maxx.
Nothing about this surprises anybody on this panel.
Well, anyway, to make a long story short, Ben loved Tiny Tim. So, you know, on a TJ Maxx night, he hired Tiny, had him go into studio with an a cappella backup group and sing during a TJ Maxx commercial. And they showed him quickly in the image, and he got a nice paycheck out of it. He was thrilled. So we kind of made his season that year.
You also had a Monsterpalooza regular, Linda Blair, at many Spooky Worlds, and you became friends with Linda.
You know,
talk about your relationship with her.
I was a fan of Linda Blair. I love The Exorcist. That, you know, there's two of my favorite horror movies of all times. Vincent Price's House of Wax, and Quinn will talk to you about my tie-in with Vincent Price. But the other was Linda Blair, but I couldn't find her. She was not doing autographs, she wasn't doing any shows, but I researched and discovered she had an unpaid excise tax bill in Westport, Connecticut. So I tracked her down, I sent a letter, her mom got the letter and called me, and her mom convinced Linda to come up to visit Spooky World, and she was a continuous autograph.
He stalked her.
Legit.
I just said you stalked her. You may have glossed over the fact that he actually went and looked up her tax records in her hometown and found her.
I thought you were going to say you paid off the lien.
But actually, she was one of the best Spooky World celebrities that you ever had there, because people really were excited to meet her and talk to Linda Blair. Who's seen The Exorcist? Yeah, at that time, Linda Blair's name was on. She was an absolute household name. Everybody knew who she was.
At a certain point, Alice Cooper, you know, after a few years, Toby Mamis, the agent, would tell me, you know, Alice tries to have the tour come through Boston in the fall because we want to do Spooky World. We want to do Spooky World, you know, at night, and then do a tour date midweek at the local Orpheum Theater. And he loved coming to Spooky World. We'd line him up with I had to promise him that we would have a good set of players for golf every morning. And of course, he gave me the opportunity to select paying sponsors of Spooky World to play golf with. So it really worked nicely.
I remember when we interviewed him for one of the documentaries that we did about you, that Toby said he needed makeup. And so I remember going to that mall and buying makeup, and I was putting makeup on Alice Cooper, and I thought, this is the most ridiculous. Like, this guy is like the greatest guy in the world. He was such a gentleman. Oh my gosh, he was such a gentleman. He said, it doesn't even feel like you're putting it on. I was like, no kidding. Because I didn't really put any on, I'll bet. Great guy. But look, you did that for others of us. We got to meet these people. You know what I mean?
And we waited patiently in traffic for hours. A little bit of the location of this place. It's about 30, 45 minutes outside of Boston.
It's in the middle of nowhere. Country town, Berlin, Massachusetts.
But nowhere, but incredibly well scouted and located at the interchange of a couple of major highways in the Massachusetts area. And the elements in the area, when I drove in there as a kid, well, I didn't, my uncle did, so I'm dating myself now. We were sitting in traffic on 495, which is one of the belts outside of Boston. And then we got onto the other highway, and I'd say it took us 90 minutes to get into the parking lot. And when you came off of the highway, you could see the lights from this barn. And what you also saw was this natural fog. The location was right on this small river. You didn't have to, when I got in there, it was so heavily fogged, I thought it was in a movie, and I thought it was fake. Helping David make this film, I realized that wasn't fake fog. They literally found the most ideal location to put this. And I know a lot of you can't make it there because it doesn't exist there anymore, but having seen what Quinn's put together and what this team has put together, I think this is about as close as you can get without 1950s smell-o-vision and all those gimmicks, but You're gonna like this, and it really captures the area and the time, because it also made me feel isolated. Nobody had pagers then, cell phones. They knew how to say, you're really far away from home, and good luck finding a payphone if you think you're scared. That's how good it was.
All right, let's hear it for our Spooktacular panel. Anthony, Danny, Nate, and Quinn.